Namaste. Welcome to Bhakti Yoga Conference, Grace in an Age of Distraction. My name is Happy Jack, the founder of Happy Jack Yoga University and a Master Divinity student here at Harvard. And this is our nearly daily opportunity to come together in the virtual conference space and connect with a different beautiful soul. As you've seen, we've had monks and scholars and yogis and thought leaders, therapists, musicians, scientists, entrepreneurs, educators, people from all walks of life. And these are sincere practitioners who have discovered bhakti, who are living bhakti, and have something to share with us. And so really that's our hope, is that you walk away with ideas and inspiration as you continue on your spiritual journey. As of now, over 4,200 registrants for this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and especially those who take the time to be here live. Really grateful for your presence. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so be sure to get our attention, raise your hand. We would love to hear from you. I'm gonna spotlight our speaker here while we say a few words. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Nitesh Gor. Such an honor to have you here with us, Prabhu. I'll say a few words. Spirituality became central to Nitesh's life when, as a teenager, he founded a youth movement to campaign against UK's government's proposed forced closure of Bhaktivedanta Manor, a temple just outside of London that was purchased and gifted by George Harrison. Nitesh went on to create Avanti Schools Trust, a government-funded network of schools in the UK rooted in spirituality. He co-created the world's first equity index rooted in dynamic values, the Dow Jones Dharma Index, and now the Dharma Endowment Fund. He has helped establish numerous spiritual initiatives, from a 75-acre center in Lincolnshire to a vibrant restaurant and well-being hub in London. He has authored 2 books, Dharma of Capitalism and Before Religion, and has received an OBE from the late Queen for his services to education. Unbelievable. And so it's truly such an honor to have you here with us, Nitesh Prabhu. As I was mentioning just before we went live, you are one of a very select few that I have not met before, before this conversation. Most people are people that I've crossed paths with in Bhakti and was inspired to bring them. And yet you came so highly recommended, and no doubt from what we just heard in your bio, the important work that you're doing. It's an honor to have you here with us. The session today is called Yoga Philosophy, the indispensable role of Bhakti Yoga in education and society, and the dangers of its exclusion. My friends, if you are ready to get started with Nitesh Prabhu, please throw your arms in the air and loudly chant, Hari Bol! Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jack. That was, for a very warm welcome, and really excited to be here. Really grateful that you've made time for this, and grateful to the audience for participating. Hopefully, this can be a conversation, and I would love to leave some time at the end for a bit more conversation with whoever would like to engage in that. So yeah, thank you.
I love that. I'm just so impressed by the work that you're doing, and I see the connections because we got friends here, Sarah and George, who actually are going to Bhaktivedanta Manor this weekend. They're very new to Bhakti, but they've just discovered the manor. They're going for Ram Namavi, and just beautiful synchronicities. And before we dive into the important work that you're doing, a question that we love to ask our audience, just to get to know you, is what brought you to the path of bhakti? What brought you to your spiritual life?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that, and my earliest memories are during childhood. So 7 years old, and a 3-month trip across India with my parents, across the main, the length and breadth of India, across some of the main spiritual sacred temples, and that left a really very, very deep impression on my mind in terms of what was happening in those places, why people were so attracted to them, the inspiration that I drew from the stories that I heard there. So those types of experiences during childhood really certainly sparked something in me in terms of a curiosity, at least, towards what lies behind all of the tradition and the ritual and the imagery and all of those types of things. What is the essence that is um, foundational to that? And as I grew through my life and different things through my teenage years, then I came to discover how bhakti really is very much that foundation. And as you mentioned in the introduction, it was a point when I was 18 years old, last year of what in America would be high school. And that's when the temple which I had come to attend, I'd spent actually 3 years studying in the US, up to ninth grade. And when I came back to the UK, I had so many questions about spirituality. Somebody had left a Bhagavad Gita, and when I was in America, I was trying to read it, and I tried to read it a couple of times, and I kept getting stuck on it when I was 14-ish. And when I came back to the UK, I had so many questions from my childhood, from my reading of the Gita, from my reading of the Ramayana, and I went to dozens of places and people to try and get some answers to the questions that had stayed with me really very much since childhood, and had evolved, but were still very much there. And it was only when I really landed at the manor, Bhaktivedanta Manor, that I felt like I was getting the type of clarity with a both a rational or a logical lens, as well as the transparency to the original scripture, which to me really did touch my heart. So I felt this is somewhere where I can where I'm learning something, and I'm really gaining something, some insight here into the questions that I've had for so long. So but it wasn't very long after that interaction with the manor, maybe a year or so, when I became aware that the government was trying to close the temple down. And the reason why it was trying to close the temple down was because since George Harrison donated the temple in 1973, it had gained some degree of popularity. And it was located in a quaint English village, with 100 houses. And 2 days in the year, there was increasing number of cars coming through that village for Krishna's birthday, what we call Janmashtami. And at that time, there were only, maybe 2,000 people coming to the manor for Janmashtami. Now there's about 80,000. So the government's attempted closure was the best thing that could ever have happened to the temple, because it inspired an entire community to become aware of the temple and to engage with the temple. And so what was previously a relatively small temple community flourished into the most popular temple outside of India, practically. So and we went on to go from 17 acres that George Harrison donated all the way through to the 80 acres that we have now, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that campaign to fight the government for what we felt was an injustice. You can imagine, as a teenager, you couldn't ask for anything more. It was it was just something I believed in so deeply. It was something which was like a rebellious type phase in my life. And so that was the journey that Bhakti came to me, but also then during the campaign, how Bhakti became very much central to my life. And once we won the campaign in 1996, that youth group then went on to do many, many other things. And the alumni from that youth group went on to do some incredible projects, which I've been fortunate enough to be part of, including the Avanti Schools Trust, which I'm sure we'll speak about as we proceed.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. It's beautiful when we can have that perspective, because things happen in life, and either we can, complain about it or feel victim about it. But actually, when you see it happened for a reason, and it was such a gift, and that's such a great example. So we get a sense of like what brought you to the community. What was it? What was it about bhakti or Krishna consciousness that had you stay? How was it impacting you as a person, as a youth?
Mm.
Beyond clearly, would have been very inspiring to be a part of these initiatives, but like from a practice standpoint, sadhana, how is it impacting you?
Yeah, um, it's an interesting question. Like when I think back to that moment when I went to the manor and when the penny really did drop for me, and that was where I remember it very clearly. So I was in the reception area. I must have been 17 years old, I think. I was in the reception area of the temple. um, I was looking for something to do. There was it was kind of just a bit of a random time, but there were some books laid out on the reception desk. One of those books was the Bhagavad Gita. I was familiar with that since when I was in the US. So I just randomly opened the Bhagavad Gita to a page, and it was the 18th chapter. And in there, I read one text, and the text where Krishna says, when he's speaking about how one should offer their devotion to Krishna. And at the end of that text, he says, I'm telling you this because you are my very dear friend. And that last sentence really struck me because I'd been reading so much philosophy and so many different scriptural texts, including various different Hindu texts. I'd been reading different versions of the Bhagavad Gita. And but this one point, and this is where I feel it connects so deeply with bhakti, that this one line, which was, I'm telling you this because you're my very dear friend, that the relationship that we have with Krishna, the relationship that we can have with Krishna, and Krishna's eagerness for that relationship is really the foundational basis of the entire Vedic project. And it comes as the conclusion. It comes at the conclusion of many of the different chapters of the Gita, but it comes really into focus in that 18th chapter and Krishna's final words in the Gita. So that for me was a bit of a wake-up moment. It was a moment where I could feel, not just theoretically understand, but I could feel the profundity of the role of bhakti in spiritual life. And um, fast forward now, I mean, I think that it's become so important in terms of all of its various different implications, which I didn't appreciate at that time as a 17-year-old standing in that reception room. But as I've proceeded, like through the various different projects and studies that I've engaged in, I've come to really understand how bhakti can have that transformational impact in response to the crises that we're observing in the world today. And that's the work that for me is so important, and how it overlaps with the role of the education system in society, and the role that bhakti, I feel, must play in the educational system, and the risks of not doing that.
Wow, that's awesome. That's super inspiring. I mean, there's so much more that I want to ask about your journey, but I want to make sure we have a good amount of time to talk about the Avanti schools and the work that you're doing now. And you mentioned the importance of bhakti and the impact of that, the qualities and the virtues being in the educational system. We have many educators here. I mean, many of our audience are yoga teachers. I see our dear friend Gopi is here. She was part of the Dallas school system, 20 years as the vice principal. So we've got educators here and people who really care about about our future, the future leaders of the world. Will you share, what brought you to share? I want to hear about the story that brought you to Avanti and creating Avanti and the beautiful work that's happening there now.
Okay. There are a couple of, as is the way with some of these things, a couple of different storylines which coincided at that time. One was that I became a father for the first time in 2003. So, as you can imagine, education was front of mind, and that was certainly something I was thinking about. Another was that I was feeling um, that since I'd set up the youth group and handed it over in 2001, which was the youth group, the campaign group essentially for the temple, um, that I was looking for a new challenge. And at that time, when I spoke to my mentors, they were talking about, they spoke to me about education and its importance. And that also then prompted me to look into the education system and what the gaps were. So I was looking for an education system which had spirituality at its core, but was also inclusive, as opposed to just being dogmatic in a religious sense, or kind of restricted in a sense. And uh, and my understanding of bhakti in terms of speaking to the essence of a spiritual relationship with the divine, is a non-sectarian proposition, right? So that was important for me, just in terms of what that education system should look like. And so that was the starting point, and that was back in 2003. I knew nothing about education other than the fact that I'd been to school, but I knew nothing about the education system. I had so yeah, I and a few others, we got together and we started looking into this, and we ended up applying for a school through the UK government, and that was approved in 2005. We opened in 2008, and the aspiration was never to do more than a very small primary school, but that very quickly grew in terms of the demand that we were seeing from other parts of the country and communities. So that then flourished into what we have now, which is 12 schools across the country, 7 of which are faith designated, because at the time that was the government's structure for new school propositions. So they have a faith designation in that they are religious schools. But what's really exciting is that we also have 5 schools that are not religious schools, so not faith designated, but they have the same spiritual ethos. So we have the same spiritual underpinning. They have the yoga, the meditation. All of our schools are vegetarian, and we have unique curricula which we have developed over time and are continuing to develop, but across philosophy, religion, and ethics, the yoga meditation curricula, and a personal development curriculum. So those areas are really important for us in terms of what's going on in Avanti, but also our contribution to the education system. And our hope is that over the next year or two, we'll be able to start sharing that curricula with other schools outside of Avanti and help their teachers deliver that. And just a note on the philosophy, religion, and ethics curriculum, which is very much the core here. As you, I'm sure, appreciate that philosophy and ethics from a Western perspective is centered around ancient Greece and Rome and what all that comes from there. We obviously know that there is a world wider than the Western European understanding of philosophy and ethics. So it was important to us that the Eastern perspective, specifically the Vedic perspective, played a role in that conversation, essentially, in terms of what children and young adults engage with, because they are very different worldviews. They come at issues from different perspectives, and we really feel that the conversation and the synergy that comes from the collaboration of these different perspectives, will just make us richer for that. So that's very much what we're about, what we're trying to do in Avanti, and what we're hoping to contribute to the education system.
It's just incredible. I'd like to ask a question just from a logistic standpoint, or because I'm again looking and thinking about the audience here, and we're inspired by bhakti, and it's touched our hearts, and we're looking for ways to engage in seva, and we do some seva in our local community, and then to see a project like this to 12 schools across the UK and to see that kind of impact. How do and again, for us to think about as we, think about what's next and what projects we might want to create, how do you, I mean, it's got to take a team. It's got to take a bunch of people. Do you come up with a vision? Do you rally a bunch of people? Because it's got me saying like, what am I doing with my life? I want to have a big impact like this. And I think everybody feels they want to do something in at least their own way. How did this come together like that?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I sat in a room and drew up a master plan and kind of, step one, step two, step three, but it was anything but that. And I think, like the story I told about the campaign and how I often think that it was the British government that's done more to spread bhakti than any other entity in the UK because they tried to close down the temple. I think in many ways, um, uh, that's one of the wonderful things about bhakti because bhakti is premised on this notion of being in relationship. And being in relationship means that there's a reciprocation there. So in whichever path something takes, um, we have some confidence that there is a reciprocation happening. And therefore, whilst I may not be able to see past, past my own limited vision, that if I'm doing something with the right motivation, if I'm doing it with the right spirit, then that reciprocation will ensure that the end will be good and purposeful. And that may be beyond my immediate understanding, but I can apply myself to that path and to that process with confidence. And I feel that these types of projects are, scary. They are challenging. They are, all of those types of things that really do stretch us. But there is such beauty in seeing Krishna's intervention along that path. And I personally feel that whether it was the campaign to save the temple, whether it was some of the other projects, or whether it was Avanti that I've been involved in, that's never failed to happen. And so now I'm, I'm like, I have a very high risk tolerance because I have this sense that, well, Krishna will always intervene, and I feel that that's true, and I think that yeah, so directly to your question, I would say there is something here about trying to explore things um, and seeing what comes to us that because sometimes I speak to a lot of young, obviously, part of the Schools Trust, I speak to a lot of young people who are looking at their future and thinking about career and thinking about what do I do with my life and how do I make my life purposeful and engaged and they've come through the education system of Avanti, so they feel it strongly that I want spirituality to be part of my life, but I also need to be able to make my life work from a material logistical perspective. So they have that tension. And my kind of the way I try to engage in that conversation is to say that, look, it's very rare that that idea or that conviction or that light bulb moment just descends from the heavens one day and all of a sudden you know exactly what you want to do in your life and what your contribution in this world is going to be. It's more likely that you try different things, you try to engage yourself in service in areas that you feel some attraction to. It may not be the thing that you say, I'm going to give my life to this. It may not be that yet, but by knocking on those doors, one of those doors will open. And as you engage in that journey, um, yeah, I really feel that that's how you see that reciprocation with Krishna, because you take one step forward and Krishna takes 10 steps towards you, right? So like that we understand from the concept of bhakti, that Krishna is just waiting for that reciprocation. He's waiting for us to make the first move. And so um, I try and come at it from that perspective, that if we don't have that very strong conviction right now of what it is that I want to do, let's try and do something. Let's try and reach out to the world. Let's try and find something that connects with us, at least to some degree. Commit ourselves, give of ourselves to Krishna as our dedication to Krishna, and see what Krishna does.
Wow, that's so good. I'm just seeing one of our friends, Brandon's on the line. He helps us with social media. And I'm just thinking there's some social media reels that just came from what you just said. It's just like, it just came from your heart. And I love that because it can be easy to compare to others. We had earlier in this conference series, we had Shyama Sundar Prabhu. I mean, he's the one that came over to the UK and became friends with George Harrison, and he wrote the book Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, and these big goals, and I'm learning, to not compare myself to others. But I love that how you said how we can, if we're present, we can see Krishna's hand in it. Like we just with this conference, it started out as something pretty small, a little thing with our yoga community, and then all of a sudden, incredible people wanted to be a part of it, and it's way bigger than us and our community, and yeah, and there's just like certain things that feel right. We put ourselves out there. There's certain things that I've like really tried to make happen, and it just didn't happen. And then other things, it seems to be in this bhakti realm where things are just like flowing and people want to be a part of it, and it's like way bigger than we ever expected. Um, so yeah, thank you for that inspiration and idea, because I feel that's something that all of us can take away as we think about how to engage in the world and what our motivation is. It was beautiful.
And Jack, can I just tell you, what you just said there? I'll just tell you a brief story.
Yeah.
So for about 4 years, once we'd opened a few of our schools, for about 4 years, I was trying to get somebody from the royal family to come to one of our schools for the opening. So, as the protocol goes, you first reach out to the Queen and then you work your way downwards. But essentially, I was trying for 3, 4 years, writing letters, trying to talk to people that might have some influence. And 3, 4 years, every time the letter comes back saying, sorry, diary conflicts, et cetera, can't make it. And that went on and on. And then I just stopped trying. And about 6 months after I stopped trying, I got a phone call. And the phone call was from Harrow Council. And they said, we know this is coming out of the blue, but Her Majesty the Queen is likely to be coming to Harrow and would like her to come to Krishna Avanti, which was the first school that we opened. And I thought, like, what are the chances of that happening? And it was the first day of her Diamond Jubilee, and she was supposed to be here for about 20 minutes. She ended up staying here for a few hours, and it was an incredible day. So it is that, you see it time and time again. Like now I've come to expect it actually, that yeah, expect to see miracles.
That's beautiful. I love that. Expect miracles. Um, I want to hear, I guess we want to hear more about Avanti, because it sounds like such a beautiful community and education system. And just looking at the title of your presentation, yoga philosophy, the indispensable role of Bhakti Yoga in education and society, and the dangers of its exclusion. Will you talk a little bit about that? And then I want to get to the kind of the vision of what you see going forward. You've already, your community's already done amazing work. What happens going forward? But maybe tell us a bit about Avanti and why it's so important and why the absence of it, what the implications are.
Okay, so before I start, I'll just say that I get very excited when I speak about Avanti and education. So sometimes it comes across that everything's like perfect and we've got it going on so great. So just a caveat to say that we totally recognize that we've got a long, long way to go. We're absolute beginners in this process, and there's a heck of a lot of work to be done. So with that caveat, I'll kind of get into the rest. And if you, sorry. We are in a school building, so that's just the end of the school day, and it will shut off in a second if you can hear it on your side.
No problem. We don't even hear it. It's okay.
Oh, you don't? Okay, fine. So it's done now. So yeah, so okay, we frame it like this, that we identify three almost existential crises that we observe. One is around the environment. Another is around fractured communities, and the third is around identity. And these three things play on the world and adults, obviously, but they also have very significant impact on young people, and who are formulating and adapting to the world around them. And so what we feel are the key principles that we've brought together in what we call the Avanti Way outline essentially our approach to education. This outlines our key principles, our beliefs, the virtues that we seek to uphold ourselves and for young people to cultivate. And so I can give you kind of some insight into how we're responding to the three crises that I mentioned, and what we hope will be that contribution. So education can be, much has been said about how modern education in the Western world is based on an industrialized model, an industrialized workforce, and therefore is mechanical in that way. And the notion of the Vedic education system, which is spoken about in different parts of the Upanishads and histories, where it speaks about how education goes beyond just knowledge, and that how Bhakti incorporates this notion of knowledge and emotion, and therefore it's a knowing through the heart as opposed to just knowing through the intellect. And when we've all had that experience, right, where we know something theoretically, but then to know that at a deep level where it's mine, where it's not just borrowed from somebody else, but actually it's come to a point of real deep experience and realization. And for us, Bhakti plays an essential role in that connection of ensuring that knowledge doesn't stay as just a theoretical construct or some facts that we've memorized, but it translates into an experience, and it translates into something which means something to me fundamentally. So what we, what we try and anchor the education system around is a combination of things that speak to that from a Bhakti perspective. So for example, custodianship. So I spoke about the environmental crisis. So this notion of custodianship is, it's quite common across different spiritual religious traditions and humanist traditions in terms of the need for us to act as custodians in the world. But I think Bhakti adds a very unique lens here. And that lens is identified in the Bhagavad Gita and in other texts, where Krishna speaks about how the cosmos is essentially his conceptual body. So the body of divinity is conceptualized as the cosmos. And when we think about it like that, two things I feel happen. One thing that happens is that we develop a certain level of gratitude and respect for the environment, for the world around us, for the other people in the world, because we see this in relationship to divinity. But and that's quite a generally understood understanding and perspective. But Bhakti adds another layer, and that other layer is one of going beyond respect to one of a loving relationship. So where it's described in some of our texts about how, whether it's a parent to a child, whether it's between lovers, whatever it might be, where there is a strong loving relationship, we see the signs or the everything in relationship to the beloved. And so the notion of the Bhakti lens to the universe and to the cosmos is how everything around us acts as triggers or prompts for us to connect that to divinity. So this idea of how Bhakti, now that's obviously in one sense could be seen as high philosophy, just in terms of the, its relevance to specific age groups. But even for a 4 or 5-year-old, so we have children in our preschools from age 3, and we go all the way up to age 18. So even in our preschools, these messages are not actually lost. They are in many ways quite intuitive for young people to see the personalism behind something that we then, as we grow older, see as impersonal and distanced from a personality. So the role of Bhakti then brings us to this second point, which is around the community crisis. And this is about kind of fractured communities, and we see that at a local level, but also at a national and an international level. And so one of our principles here is that when we think about the essence that pervades different spiritual traditions, you can think about that from different perspectives. But we came to this understanding that actually, if you think about love as an underpinning, commonly accepted foundation, that is, in one sense, a translation of bhakti, because you can have, what is it that will allow us to transcend sectarian boundaries, transcend sectarian, them and us type dynamics. And that underpinning of love, as it's described in the Bhagavad Gita as the culmination of the yoga system, that underpinning, we feel, is an important lens for us to use to be able to transcend sectarian boundaries. And how we then can engage in that in such a way that doesn't mean that we try and remove all types of difference, because that's not how love works. Love essentially is the engagement or the dynamic between two. And therefore, two means there is a distinction. But how does that distinction also become one? And that is underpinned and clarified by the preeminent teacher of Bhakti Yoga, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who speaks about this philosophy of simultaneous oneness and difference. So there's this piece about how these fractured communities have arisen because in the West, and I don't want to have too much of a go at Western philosophy, but this idea of, this dichotomy, everything has to be binary. It's either this or that. And the Vedic approach is very different. It's not this or that, it's and, right? It's this and that. And therefore, this idea of oneness and difference, that actually there is a place for distinctive identities, but there's a place for understanding what is that underlying identity that is common, that brings us together. So, and then it comes on to this idea about the identity crisis, and this is, of course, again, these things are relevant for adults, but they're so profound for young people who are trying to find their own identity, and they're struggling to do that because there is so much superimposition from external pressures on their own identity, and for them to find out who they really are, like who do they feel comfortable being, and what determines that, like what is the most influential thing. And so for us, our sixth principle is around loving relationships, that ultimately, as the Bhagavad Purana says, that the ultimate need of a living being, the ultimate need is to love and to be loved. That's the ultimate need. And that need is expressed and fulfilled through relationships. So this notion of how do loving relationships essentially support this, their journey in their life and their growth as an individual, and then feeling. So to give you a simple example, if I'm a teenager, whose opinions am I listening to? Whose opinions matter to me? Is it somebody who I have no idea who they actually are and I see behind a screen? Or is it the people who I love around me? This may seem trivial in some respects, but it's having such a massive impact on how children and young people are growing up in our societies. And so this notion of relational dynamics as being important. Now, I'm saying all of this in the context of an education system, right? So you can probably hear or see in your mind's eye what the Department for Education and other school kind of authorities might be thinking about what is going on here in terms of Avanti's approach to education. But the truth is that whilst some may have felt that way, the truth is that our education system, and I would say even broader than that, our societies are in crisis. There is a problem, and we don't have a solution. So, if you look at the number of students who are on prescription medication, that's a shocking number as a percentage. And our at Avanti, our challenge really is what the choices that we have in front of us in terms of how these children grow up in society. What do we want to do? Do we want to keep going down the path that we're going, which has led to the situation and the environment and the context that we see ourselves in right now, and what our children are being exposed to right now? Or do we want to do something different? And so for us now, we were previously a little bit tentative in terms of how we spoke about these things, about being and them being the essence of education. But now we're completely unapologetic because we know that we feel confident that the solution must lie in spirituality. Educational excellence by itself from an academic perspective, and we hold educational excellence very dear. One of our three, foundational pillars is educational excellence, followed by, not followed by, but alongside character formation and spiritual insight. So at a certain point, we were a little bit shy or tentative about the spiritual insight piece. How will it be received? Will people understand it? Will they know what we're talking about? All that kind of stuff. But now we're absolutely unapologetic because we are very confident that if we continue to ignore spirituality, and here I do make a distinction between religious education as it's formed or formulated as tied to a particular religious institution and spiritual insight. I'm making a deliberate distinction there. That if we continue to ignore that aspect, then we will continue to see the challenges that we are seeing, and they will only get worse. And therefore, it's our firm conviction that Bhakti has an indispensable role in the education system and in society at large. I'll get off my soapbox now.
It's so good. Oh my goodness. This is so important. And in fact, I'm gonna start bringing our audience on a little bit early here because there's two individuals that I want to call on, and they were actually both speakers at the conference. First, I'm going to bring on Atreya Rishi Prabhu, who is doing some beautiful work as well in the education system, and then to Gopi, Mother Gopi Gita, and then Sarah and George are ready with a question. But let us get our dear friend Mars, Atreya Rishi Prabhu. Brother, welcome. It's so beautiful to see you.
I feel so fortunate to see our speaker speak about education. Because as a father, and there is many of us, we are suffering from having children who did not receive that Bhakti education, despite our efforts in early Gurukula system. This is very refreshing. And yes, I also acknowledge the grief that I feel, because some of these children are in our life, and whether they are struggling because they cannot cope with the domination system. They don't know how to cope with it, despite the fact that they have very good hearts and they have had that education, some understanding of what that education is, their own understanding of what that bhakti means. But really, there was no proper training and education the way you describe it. It's very refreshing to listen to you. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Atreya Rishi. I don't know if you know of Atreya Rishi, Nitesh. He was a Prabhupada disciple, part of the GBC, opened the first temple in Tehran. Just a beautiful soul, and that means a lot to hear those kind words. Thank you so much for sharing, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, I've heard and read about him, but not met him in person. So very grateful to be introduced on this call. Thank you so much for your words.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, brother. And Now we're sending our love, high vibes to dear Atreya Rishi Prabhu. Thank you for sharing. And now we're bringing it from the DC area to the great state of Texas. Gopi, Mother Gopi Gita, welcome back to the conference. You know, I had to bring you on because again, we were together in the Oxford program last semester, and what I just remember, you're so good at reflecting back and asking brilliant questions, and this is right in your wheelhouse. You've been an educator for many decades, so we would love to hear what is on your heart.
Thank you, Happy Jack, and Naveen Krishna, Nitesh Prabhu. We have been following you. I want to say ISKCON's educators have been following you. You're like a hero and a celebrity to many of us. And I'll never forget 2000, I think it was like 6 or 7, maybe a bit later, where we heard the news that you had gotten the government state-funded schools. And I can't tell you how many hours I have spent with the Ministry of Education pouring through the words that you put together as far as your ethos and philosophy of education. And you're definitely one of our top educational leaders in our society and beyond. And I'm just so grateful to, I met you briefly. You gave us a tour of your facility in 2011, and I'm just grateful to reconnect with you here. What I really loved about your presentation, the beginning, you spoke about the faith-based schools that you have established in Avanti, and then you spoke about 4 non-religious schools. And so the work that I'm doing currently with leadership parenting and leadership teaching is supporting school leaders and presenting Bhakti not as a religious philosophy, but as a spiritual philosophy, that it's not organizational and you can add it to any religion, or even atheists can implement it and can get connected to their internal instinct, their internal Krishna. And so I'm curious about that work that you're doing, how you present it as a bhakti, as a non-religious journey or philosophy in the space of education.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's likewise, it's so happy to be reconnected again. We've been hoping to get you over here actually to do some training with our teachers. So maybe this is a good prompt to bring you over to the UK. So the invite is there. But to the question, yeah, it always struck me when A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada spoke about Krishna consciousness being a non-sectarian path. And I used to think about, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be non-sectarian? Because, you know, there's Krishna and he's a particular form and is in a particular geographic, you know, all of that stuff. So, but when we set up the first school, there was a debate about, should we be a faith-based, religiously designated school when our philosophy is not really religiously sectarian. But at the time, the government only allowed those types of schools to be set up by non-government entities. So that's the path that we took. But when we set up these 5 community schools, 3 of them are new and 2 of them were 2 of the worst performing schools in the country that the government asked us to take on and turn around. And I'm happy to say that after a couple of years, they are now doing extremely well. But the challenge for us was, okay, how do we integrate spirituality in these contexts in a way that is acceptable and in a way that is not, you know, any of this kind of like coercive, undercover, all of that type of stuff, but is genuinely adding value to anyone of any background. So that got me really looking quite deeply relative to me, deeply into our tradition and into our philosophy and into our texts about what does our tradition say about that, and therefore what came from that was the Avanti way in terms of boiling down our principles to their essence. And this is why I feel so strongly about bhakti being that essence, because it is so transferable and accessible. And And then being able to, and we took a long time, the Avanti Way is a very short document, but we took a long time and through many iterations to try and express it in a way that has fidelity to the tradition, because it's rooted in the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. So it has that fidelity, and yet it is articulated in a way that whether you are from any faith or none, you can engage with the principles outlined there. So that's been a real challenge for us. But I feel confident that what it does do in terms of setting out a vision for education that is accessible, we've seen that now in practice, because those schools which we took on and which we set up, they are very popular schools, and less than, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's less than 5% of our student population are of Hindu background. And they have there is nothing there which, whilst they have that spiritual ethos and the curriculum and the yoga and the meditation, the vegetarian, all of that stuff going on, there is no pushback there about, what are you trying to do with my kids and turn them into Hindus? Or that might
I
be.
love that. Less than 5% Hindu background is really tantalizing to hear, because I'm working with superintendents in the Bay Area right now. I'm also an executive coach for school leadership, and they're implementing these programs in their schools. And this gives me faith because I'm new. I'm following your path. I've been in our Bhakti school in Dallas for so many years, and now I'm kind of following your journey. And so I just, everybody listening, I visited one of his schools in 2011, and the quality with which you hit all of the boxes, not just the bhakti, but the eco-friendly, the environmentally conscious, that was 15 years ago. I can only imagine where it's at right now. And so I just wanted to share my gratitude. And yes, please, let's connect. I can learn a lot from you, and I can also help your entire community. So I'd love to connect more. And just one last thing, I know there's some hands up here, but Mother Atreya Rishi Prabhu, I've heard so much about you, and I would love to connect with you as well. All right, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yes.
And hi Sarah, bye Sarah and George.
Amazing. We're sending our love, high vibes. Mother Gopi Gita out there making the world a better place as well. All right. Yeah, we've got a few hands up. Let's bring it. Sarah George, representing the UK as well. Kent. I was so curious because I don't know the geography so well in the UK, and I'm thinking you guys have young kids. How close are these 12 schools? Is there anything nearby?
I don't think there are any in Kent, are there? I don't know.
Not that
Oh yeah, not yet.
No, and
we'll wait.
And the other thing is, people think that everyone knows everyone, and that everyone's near London, and that's definitely not the case.
We're 2 hours from
2 hours, 2 hours, but
Anyway,
we'll be there on Sunday.
Question.
So, there's a, I'm just looking at the cameras. I know a number of the people on this call have got kids living at home, so under the age of 18. Many of them at school, some of them are not at school. And I was just wondering, are there some really simple things you can do with your kids, which are fun, and not lecturing in any way, where you could do these 3 pillars of environment, community, and identity? Can you give a couple of examples? I mean, we get our kids to personally put their recycling in the recycling bins every day. So we have 3 different bins depending on what to recycle. They do that. They all eat vegan food. But I'm just wondering, so there's a bit on the environment there already. But what else could we do for communities and identity, or even more for the environment? Any ideas?
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll come into this from a slightly different perspective, and you can draw me back if you want, because I think the environmental stuff, I could reel off a bunch of stuff that we do in the schools about gardening and the recycling and the projects type stuff and all of those things. They'll be quite obvious to you. I would like to make a point which speaks to all of these areas and more, and it's something that keeps coming up. And I've realized that for me, it was the most impactful thing for me. My children are now 18 and 21. So when I think back and I'm asked about this, about what can we do to support our children as they grow, I think particularly in the type of world that we live in right now, the first thing that parents often go to is to give them different things to do. And that's great, right? They positive engagement and directing, all good stuff. However, there is a challenge there. And I think if you were to take it all away, if you were to strip it all back, and what does the one thing that I plead and beg with all of our parents who attend Avanti, whose children attend Avanti, to do, is to have conversations with their children. And it seems like such a silly thing to say, but I'm finding that not many parents have high quality conversations with their children on a daily basis. And if that's not happening, then the other things are superfluous to a greater or lesser extent. And so even though people like or try and take me in different directions on this in terms of honing in on different types of activities, which I'm very happy to do, and I can share a curriculum and I can do all of those things, and that will give you it will give you a zillion different ideas as to what you could do. But the fact is that all of those things, as I say, do become superfluous if the high quality conversation is not happening daily. May not be possible for everyone, but as often as is possible, that is the most impactful thing. And I've seen that with parents and children. I've seen it with my work with youth. And, I'm still very much involved after 30 years of setting up the youth group, still very much involved in mentorship with them and helping different age groups in that regard. And again, for me, it's the number one thing. I would even say to the exclusion of all others, if that's the one thing that can be done, do it. And because ultimately, it's based on the principles, what I spoke about before. Ultimately, it's about the relationship. If the relationship with the adult and with peers and others is strong, everything else flows naturally. And that relationship, when they learn to engage in that conversation with yourself, you can imagine what that does to the identity crisis. From a young person's perspective, their identity now becomes rooted in something really firm, really solid, really loving, because it's with people that they love. That's where they're. So then when they get this stuff coming at them from outside, they know where to root themselves. And you can think about that also, how they then engage with communities and society, because they're coming from a place where they are firm in themselves in that relationship. So, and the practice, the habits, the intelligence and the insight that they gain from those conversations, they apply that in their life, in their engagement with others. And ultimately they'll teach others to do the same, right? So if we can show by example, and that real sense of interest and intent in those conversations, I just, I had to say that because I really do very, very deeply feel that is the thing we should be focused on.
Yeah, no, we agree. Actually, we have
Yeah,
fantastic relationships with our kids. We talk to them every day.
Well, we do it 1-to-1. So in the morning we do half an hour each 1-to-1.
Amazing.
At 25 minutes, and in the evening we do half an hour each 1-to-1.
Yeah.
So and then we swap.
Wow.
So we have very honest conversations with them.
Fantastic.
They ask us about anything, tax.
Tax,
Weird things they've seen on the internet.
Yeah, anything. It doesn't. They bring it up and we teach. Tell them all about it.
Well, that way you can show your values, which we do. So thank you. That was really great to hear that from you.
Yeah.
And what time are you going to the manor?
We're getting there at 10 on Sunday, so we're.
Might see you there.
Yeah, fabulous.
All right.
That's awesome.
Look out for you.
That's so cool. I love it. Amazing. We're sending our love, high vibes. Sarah and George over in Kent, UK. Beautiful. My goodness, we're at time. We got so many hands up. Maybe we'll take one brief reflection from Swati. But I want to respect everyone's time. But let's get Swati on. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay, so first of all, Hare Krishna, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. So there's something I've been reflecting on, and would love your insight too. So you have mentioned about exploring and like finding the connection. So like I would love your insight on like as a student how I can explore and like I want to serve Krishna's better, and I actually want to serve to the SCON, and I actually want to help the community to grow better. So yeah.
Okay, I will try and be brief on this one. I'll give you, maybe I can just share a framework that actually Swami Prabhupada shared in terms of, the Vedic system has this idea of varnashram. And the varnashram system, we haven't got time to get into the background of that, but essentially it's a extremely powerful system to respond to individual level kind of psychophysical roles in society and aptitudes and skills. So the thing that he said, which really is very powerful, I feel, and I share with young people, is that where you find the nexus of the thing that you really love and the thing that comes naturally to you, the overlap, right? The overlap between these two segments is something that you should look at carefully, because it will likely be speak to you in a very powerful way. And so I would say that when you think about exploring different services or different activities or whatever kind of projects that you might be inspired to get involved with, spend a little bit of time. I mean, I know some people who spend years on it. I don't think it's needed. I think spend a little bit of time just thinking about what is it that in your past where you felt at your best, that you felt really inspired by, and try and unpick the principles that led you to that state of whatever it was, like engagement, inspiration, joy, whatever it was, and see what the generic principle there was. And then also think about, and that you can get opinions from others around you, your friends, your loved ones, about what they feel and what you feel is your unique gift to the world. What are you uniquely really good at? What comes supernaturally to you? And I think when you think about these things in that way, then that will give you some inspiration. It will give you some ideas. It won't, unless you're very fortunate, it probably won't be a very clear black and white direction, but it will give you some notion, some sense of direction. And as I say, it's not a problem engaging in different services, activities, projects, which are rightly intended, but are not your life's work. It's no problem kind of doing things and in a way that you're contributing in that moment in time over a shorter period of time, but you're giving something back. So there's no loss there. It might not be what you do for the rest of your life, but get involved. There's so many things happening, around, I'm sure, in your locality, or even now with the digital media that you can do remotely. So find something and just get involved, and through that, just pay attention to the doors that are opening, to how you're feeling, to the inspiration that's coming. And then, one thing will definitely lead to another. And at some point, I'm absolutely sure you will feel Krishna calling in a certain direction, and then you'll be ready to walk through that door.
Beautiful. So good. I love it. Thank you, Swati. We're sending our love, appreciation, gratitude to you. Beautiful question. But in essence of time, we're complete. Nitesh Prabhu, what would you leave us with? As we step forward, I'm personally so inspired. You've shared so much already, but I guess thinking about these spiritual seekers, newer on the path, bhakti is somehow capturing our heart. We're kind of curious about next steps in our sadhana, in our different ways to engage in service. What might you leave us with as we step forward into the world?
Maybe this, maybe that bhakti, love, these are active principles. They are at one level a sentiment, and at another level they are an active expression. And therefore, I think it's really important for us to think about how can we make this real, not just something that I do in my private time, like somebody might practice meditation. That has its role and its importance in our sadhana, as you say, not just in terms of what we theoretically understand from the principles and the knowledge of the Gita and other texts, but also in my daily life. How is my daily life becoming an expression of that principle of love or bhakti? How is my active life becoming an expression of that? Because otherwise, the danger is that we kind of become a little bit schizophrenic in that, we have one life, which is our private internal life, and our external life is completely disassociated from that. And I think the beauty and the opportunity in Bhakti Yoga is how these two internal and external lives can become one, how they actually can be, the internal is non-different from what's going on outside and what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. And from the perspective of a Bhakti yogi, then, our principle is that actually our expression, our life, our bhakti is a part of our sadhana. It's a part of my spiritual practice. So what I do in service, what I do in terms of my spiritual activism in the world to make the world a better place, is the phrase you've used a couple of times, like what I do there is part of my spiritual practice, and they're not disassociated. And I think that when we can do that as practitioners, the message that our life sends to the world is something that inspires ourselves and others to think about this as being important and central to our life. So that I say that kind of speaking to myself, because I'm trying to convince myself also to do the same. But I do think it's a really important principle.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Such words of wisdom, gratitude, respect. We're sending to Nitesh Prabhu, and we're going to share, for those catching the recording, ways that you can stay in touch on Instagram, the Avanti, some websites. We'll make sure that you know how to get in touch. And my friend, thank you so much for being here. Everybody else, we're getting to the end. We got 2 more sessions, Saturday, Sunday, and then next week, the grand finale. But so grateful for your association. We're sending all of our love and high vibes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you.